What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Fat Boys Dynasty podcast, presented to you by the Fantasyholics Podcast Network. Once again, live on the YouTube channel. Listen, here we are again. One fat boy riding solo again this week. Brant had other commitments that he had to take care of. And it is a busy time in everybody's lives. It is officially spooky season. It is Halloween's Eve tonight. I did a little trick-or-treating with my kids tonight myself. Had to get that dad tax in, of course. Plenty more of that where that came from tomorrow. But I thought, what a perfect fitting discussion for Halloween's Eve's episode to do a little trick-or-treating that only a fat boy could bring you tonight. But before we get into that, there's also a particular bird that's often associated with Halloween. Edgar Allan Poe even wrote a famous book poem about said bird, and that is a raven. And the Ravens made a move in the world, NFL world, that affects us in the fantasy community. They traded for Deontay Johnson, who was having an up and down season with the Panthers. When he played, and him and Andy Dalton were on the right wavelength together, they were creating something special for fantasy managers. It was getting to the point where we couldn't leave Deontay Johnson on our bench. Even as a member of the dreadful Carolina Panthers, it was to a point where it was only fitting that he was played. And here we are now. We've come to this situation where he now leaves as the clear alpha in Carolina, and he goes to Baltimore. And where does he fit in the pecking order? We'll talk about that and some trick-or-treating as soon as we get after the intro. So anyway, back to Deontay Johnson. First of all, on the surface, for a lot of us, without diving super deep, maybe you don't own a whole lot of Baltimore Ravens pass catchers. Maybe one of the only few things you've known about the Baltimore Ravens this year is how damn good Derrick Henry's been, and how dreadful Mark Andrews has been up until the last 2 weeks, where he's had some touchdown catches and starting to find a little bit of chemistry with Lamar. I was kind of shocked. I think I knew, but I was kind of shocked that with Derrick Henry in the backfield, with Lamar Jackson under center, that the Ravens pass game was one of the premier pass games in the NFL. They're not just the old ground and pound Baltimore Ravens NFC North team or AFC North team that just consistently runs the ball for small clips at a time. They're airing it out in Baltimore. So I think being nervous about Deontay Johnson's role because they're not a passing offense is kind of silly, because they've proved, absent Greg Roman, now that he's moved on, that in fact Lamar Jackson can sling the ball, and he can sling it pretty well. Obviously, it's been fun owning Zay Flowers this year. Rashad Bateman has finally, come onto the scene, and then Mark Andrews is getting back into it a little bit. Derrick Henry's obviously having a great year. So where does Deontay Johnson slide into all this? I want to say, with all the wide receiver trades that have taken place to this point in the season, Patrick Mahomes, Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, those guys all projected to slot in and be a contender for top targets on their respective teams. Obviously, Garrett Wilson has something to say about, Devontae Adams, Travis Kelce, with DeAndre Hopkins. There's not a whole lot in Buffalo, but I do still think that Josh Allen will spread it around fairly evenly. But again, Deontay Johnson's just in that situation where um, I don't think he's probably more targeted or more talented rather than Zay Flowers. Maybe a little more sure with his hands at this point in his career. So that'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. Not going to take away those big down the field threat targets that Rashad Bateman has been getting at this point. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. I do think he's probably going into the situation as third at best each week, but behind probably Mark Andrews and one of Rashad Bateman or Zay Flowers. I'd still put Zay as the alpha there, but it'll be interesting to see how he shakes out. I probably wouldn't start him if I had other options. I know in one of my home leagues that I care an awful lot about, Deontay Johnson probably will be in my lineup this week. I lost Rashee Rice in that league. I just lost Stephon Diggs this week with his ACL tear. So it's definitely one of those things that if it's the best option you got, he's got to go in. I'm staring down the barrel of starting him or starting a third running back, which I probably will lean Brian Robinson over him. But it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out this week. I'm personally, like I said, if I can avoid it, I'm going to wait a week to see how that goes. But if you're in a situation where you have to, it could be worse, right? He could have went someplace with a subpar quarterback and a team that ran the ball pretty heavy. Like I said, that's not Baltimore this year, which is surprising, but it's not. All right, let's get into this. I said on the beginning of the show that it's spooky season. It's Halloween Eve, and we're going to play a trick or treat. The only way that the Fat Boys could do so. And I know I'm saying Fat Boys. I miss Bran. I wish he was here. He's not. So this Fat Boy is going to play trick or treat with you just by myself. And although I do have my, candy corn stash sitting right here because I am one of those guys that likes candy corn. This doesn't involve actual candy. As sad as that is for this Fat Boy. This trick or treat is, are these players, certain players that I'm getting ready to talk about, are they going to trick you into taking your fantasy season down and just knocking you out of contention the rest of the season? Or could we expect a treat from these guys and they're going to bounce back to that land of fantasy relevancy that they once were, that caused us to draft them early in startups this year, that caused us to draft them early in redrafts this year, and it caused us to trade for them or just hang a lot of hope on them? I know for myself, one of these guys is on my roster, and it's just been absolutely defeating this year to the point where I had to go out and make some moves. But let's get into this. Let's jump head first into this. I'm going to start with a running back that a lot of people took really early this year. He had great usage last year. Although his efficiency wasn't all that great down the stretch last year, his usage was good. It's Travis Etienne, folks. He was taken in the top 12 running backs off the board in dynasty startups, probably top 15 backs off the board in redrafts. He's currently sitting at RB 39, and I know he's missed a little bit of time. He's been banged up this year, but he really hasn't been efficient, and that's been the problem that seems to continue to plague him. 56 carries, 230 yards, 4.11 yards per carry, only 2 touchdowns. Not finding the end zone when you're not super efficient is a killer for a running back. 23 targets, only 16 receptions for 91 yards receiving. Again, a much better PPR back than this. He's got to get involved. So is he going to trick or treat us the rest of the season? I think this is a guy that has a very big opportunity to treat you to a good second half season. He's got the PPR upside. Like I said, he's got that established long-term connection with Trevor Lawrence dating back to their days at Clemson. This is a guy that now has Brian Thomas Jr. missing a few weeks, Christian Kirk headed to the IR. Evan Ingram's going to be the target hog. We all know that, right? And then it's like guys like Parker Washington, who was one of the bigger waiver claims of the week. And yes, Tank Bigsby's still going to be there. I think Tank Bigsby still gets some love as well. But somebody else got to catch the ball. Somebody else got to step up for this Jacksonville Jaguars offense. Travis Etienne's got the opportunity. And I'm going to tell you guys really quick, we're going to figure out within the next 2 to 3 weeks if this guy is a trick or a treat the rest of the season. I'm leaning towards, I think he's a trick, but he's got a really good opportunity to be a treat just because of the injuries, because of the situation around him. If he can get himself healthy, get himself on the field, find the end zone a few times, fantasy managers are going to be really happy. But I will tell you this, with Kirk out, with Brian Thomas Jr. out, if ETN doesn't get back on track early, I'm only letting him pull me down a week, 2 max, and I'm going to try to unload him um, in dynasty leagues if I can. If I can go get a better running back potentially that maybe is a little older from a non-contending team, that's probably something I look at. RB39 is not helping you pursue a championship this year. Definitely spooky being a Travis Etienne owner. Okay, let's move on to the wide receiver position here. I've got 2, and I think it's only fitting that we start with a guy who, if I had to guess what he'd wear to go trick or treating, it would be that of a penguin. I'm talking about Jalen Waddle, who again top 10 to top 20 wide receiver taken in the offseason and in startups. Young, tied to currently wide receiver 63. All right. The tough part about this is his success clearly feels like it's tied to Tua Tagovailoa, why he is in Miami. And again, extremely spooky when you're considering the fact that Tua can't seem to stay healthy. Brant and myself both said this on Sunday morning. I wish Tua would wear a Guardian cap. I know they've come out and said he's got this new helmet that's supposed to be so much safer and all the things for him, but it's nerve-wracking, right? Tyreek you feel a little better about because Tyreek's older, and I mean he's still tanking the season a lot, but he's older, right? In a dynasty startup, you probably took him early, but you took younger probably to pair with him. Whereas Waddle was probably your first wide receiver off the board. He was young. You're thinking, hey, I've got my wide receiver 1 for the next few years. And right now that's spooky. Again, though, I will say I think this leads to being a treat if Tua can keep his legs underneath of him, if Tua can stay healthy. I think the second half of this season could be a massive bounce back for Jalen Waddle and the Miami Dolphins as a whole. That division's still pretty wide open. You're chasing Buffalo right now. New England's got a rookie quarterback who Drake May's been looking good, but there's still not a whole lot going on there. You've got the Jets that are just abysmal. I mean, who knows what you've got going on there. Aaron Rodgers and them have traded for Devontae Adams, and that looked like to be the smallest issue that they had was their pass catchers. So, really this division's still wide open for the Miami Dolphins to make a charge. So we'll see if Waddle can get to be a part of that. Like I said, I think I'm leaning treat with Jalen Waddle, just based on the fact that I think Tua bounces back. Obviously, Tyreek's the one going to draw the better corner every week, so that should start leading Waddle for some cupcake touchdowns as we move on. Another wide receiver who you've been disappointed with, coming off of a huge week, which was great to see, left the contest a little early and then came back and ended up salvaging a good week. Chris Olave, currently wide receiver 45, right in that same discussion with Waddle, one of the earlier wide receivers off the board. Here's the scary part for me with Olave. This is the part that's super spooky to me, is Derek Carr has looked either really good or really bad this year. And then Spencer Rattler and Jake Horner both are that's a situation. It's like, do you want that as your quarterback room, or do you want to go spend 24 hours locked in the haunted mansion on the outside of town where it's always lightning and pitch black clouds over the top of it and crows sitting on the fence, right? With the doors that are the shutters that bang and the doors that fly open and shut. I don't want to be a part of that quarterback room. I don't want my wide receivers to be part of that quarterback room. That's one of those situations where it's just not good, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better for the New Orleans Saints. Their cap space is so bad moving forward, and I know bad teams still have to have or can still put out fantasy relevant players, but if they can't afford to put offensive linemen on the field to protect, whether it be Derek Carr, Spencer Rattler, or Jake Horner, then those guys aren't going to have time for Chris Olave to develop these routes and get open in space. And it's going to be a couple years of purgatory for the New Orleans Saints. As a Falcons fan, I am smiling on the inside. However, I'm being professional right now. For the fantasy industry, we all want to see guys like Chris Olave succeed. And I just think this is one of them that I would say is a trick. I think you're going to get some big games off of him this year, but I think on a week in and week out basis, he's going to be so inconsistent. Some weeks he's going to do well and be one of your top scorers. Other weeks you're going to be like, man, I wish I would have played Romeo Dobbs over Chris Olave or Rashad Bateman or, whoever else you have on your team, there's going to be weeks where there's guys that outscore him on your bench because I do believe he's going to be so inconsistent because quarterback play is going to be abysmal. Offensive line play is abysmal. And even as long as he's still in town, Alvin Kamara is going to be the focal point of this offense. So Chris Olave, he's coming off of a big week right now. If somebody's dumb enough to overpay for him, I think you absolutely have to unload that headache. Let that headless horseman ride on into a different stable, if you will. It's spooky season is here for Chris Olave. He is going to trick you the rest of the season. I saved the biggest one for last. That is quarterback Patrick Mahomes, who was taken as a top 3 quarterback in dynasty startups. Currently quarterback 20 on the season. He has thrown at least 1 interception in every single game this year and only 8 touchdowns. This is not the Patrick Mahomes we're used to. This is not what we're used to out of the Andy Reid offense. Listen, they're undefeated, right? You can't say anything bad about Andy Reid as a head coach because they are finding ways to get this done in Kansas City. But from a fantasy standpoint, from a fantasy manager, from somebody who was riding the Patrick Mahomes train myself, I did it for 7 long weeks and had enough. I went and made a trade. I got Dak Prescott, who granted wasn't great this week, but did outscore Patrick Mahomes. For me, I just felt like I was in a spot where quarterback play was derailing me. Patrick Mahomes is one of those guys you're supposed to be able to set it and forget it. He's getting you 25 plus points a week. Don't have to look at your quarterback except for his bye week, and it's been anything but. So for me, like I said, this is one of those situations where if I can find a way to get out from under him this year, I don't necessarily want to trade him, but if I can go get an aging quarterback, a Geno Smith maybe, or a Matthew Stafford, or somebody that's got a healthy repertoire of pass catchers. I do believe DK Metcalf's going to try to play this week, so that's why I bring Geno involved. Those guys that are going to air the ball out, that have good pass catchers to catch the ball. I think I'd rather start one of those guys the rest of the season. I'm interested to see how this D-Hop situation helps. Obviously, he wasn't on the field a whole lot last week with just getting traded there. So this week will really be the telling week for that. But man, without Rashee Rice, Patrick Mahomes just kind of doesn't look like Patrick Mahomes this year. Travis Kelce's not as efficient as he has been in years past. It just feels like it's a recipe for a trick from Patrick Mahomes and not so much a treat. Like I said, it is a spooky season. So I think that pretty well sums it up for me. Again, I am sitting on this camera solo. Scary that they leave me in charge of this podcast by myself without somebody to rein me in. And what better way to come in here and bore you guys for 20 minutes than on Halloween Eve night with some spooky season trick-or-treating like only a fat boy can do. I hope everybody has a great Halloween. For those of you that are out celebrating, taking kids out and about, or trick-or-treating yourself, maybe you're giving candy out. Hopefully it's a good season. Hopefully we have a good contest tomorrow night. We have a good football game matchup between the Jets and the Texans. It'll be interesting to see how that Texans offense shakes out, missing Nico Collins and now Stephon Diggs. Who's CJ Stroud's guy? It's got to be Tank Dell. That makes the most sense. But it'd be interesting to see if John Mechie, Dalton Schultz, or Aiden or Xavier Hutchinson can get anything going to get involved. And then maybe this is the week that the Jets finally get some momentum going. Get involved. Like I said, hopefully tomorrow night's contest is not spooky. As we start navigating week 9 of the NFL season. Hopefully we don't get, like I said, started out with a stinker on Halloween. So for those of you watching, happy football. And for those of you trick-or-treating, many success. I hope you get lots and lots and lots of good candy. Nothing like oatmeal raisin cookies or, box of dots. I wish you success, full-size candy bars. Happy hunting to everyone for Halloween. And as always, stay hungry and stay fat, my friends.